Welcome to this Photoshop tutorial on integrating text with textured surface in Photoshop 2020. So this will work for text or any other object that a logo or something like that you want to integrate with the texture of some surface in Photoshop. It uses something called Displacement Maps, which we'll be looking at now shortly. And it also utilizes these blend effects as well in Photoshop. So this here is the final file. So let's look and see how we achieve this. So here we have this image with these wooden planks and some fruit and vegetables around it. So we're going to start by creating a displacement map. So displacement map tells Photoshop how to contour the surfaces of the object that you're trying to get to fit into it. So you can see here, if we look up really close to this wooden texture, you can see we've got all these little bumps and areas where there's no wood that we need to integrate the text to make it look realistic. And a displacement map is essentially a contrast mask. So Photoshop will look for contrast in order to integrate that successfully with the image. And in order to create a displacement map, it uses just a basic black and white image, and we have to add a little bit of contrast. So let's get started with the displacement map. First thing I'm going to do, because it needs to be only black and white, is to go to image mode, and then we're going to choose grayscale. So we're going to discard our color. Click discard here. And now we're going to add a little bit of contrast. It doesn't really matter in terms of destructive changes here. We just want to create a nice contrasty displacement map. So I'm going to go add in this contrast using the image adjustment brightness contrast slider and just turn up the contrast a little bit. And click on OK. So by default, the contrast map, sometimes it can be a little too sharp around the edges and create kind of jagged surfaces or jagged edges in what you're trying to integrate into the texture, the text or the image you're trying to integrate. So to do that, we'll soften it up a little bit to stop that from happening. So in order to do that, then we go to filter and we go to blur and Gaussian blur. And we can just add a very small amount of Gaussian blur. So I'm going to add just 3. It will depend on the size of the image, how many pixels are in the image that you're working with, to how much you need to blur. So the more pixels in the image, the more blur you might need to add. The less pixels, the less blur. So I'm going to add 3 for this one. I think that's about okay. It softens it up nicely. And then I'm going to click on OK. And then I need to save this as a displacement map. So in order to do that, we need to save it as a PSD file. So go to File, Save As, and we'll just save it here in this folder. I'm just going to call this Displace Map and save it as a PSD file. So now we have our Displace Map saved. I'm just going to take this image. I'm going to go to the history here, and I'm going to go back to the beginning to get our base image. So now we're going to add the text. So T on the keyboard to operate the text tool. And then we're just going to write some text there. It can be anything. I'm just going to use this. So I'm using black text, which should be fine. You can use a dark gray or something like that if you want as well. So we're going to leave it right about here is fine. And then we need to turn this into a smart object. So we go to filter and convert for smart filters. So this will give us much more flexibility with editing it when we're making the displacement map. If you don't add a smart object, then you need to undo your displace map and then redo it. Whereas with a smart object, we can just go in and edit our settings. So convert for smart objects, it's just telling you to enable re-editable smart filters, select the layer, and it will be converted into a smart object. So if we just double click, for instance, we can edit the text. That's all that's telling us. So next we need to start integrating this. So the first thing we're going to do is add the displacement map. So for that, we're going to go to Filter, Distort, Displace. and we're going to choose our displacement map. These are settings I've used before, so I'm going to go ahead and use them. So 12 for the horizontal scale and 12 for the vertical scale. Stretch to fit and wrap around. And I'm going to click on OK. And now I get the option to choose my displacement map, which was this displace map. It's a PSD file, as you can see down here. And click on OK. And let's zoom in 100% just to check that out. Okay, that looks pretty good. It's moving with the contours of the wood nicely. Now we need to integrate this a little bit. So what you can do to first integrate it is choose a blending mode. So something like overlay might work. Sometimes multiply is also a good one to use. In this case, it doesn't work so well. So you can scroll through the different displace modes to see which one works good. So I'm going to go, I think, with this one. I think soft light, darken now. So let's go with soft light for this. That looks pretty good. You can also lower the opacity, or the fill is more recommended, because if you lower the opacity, it will affect it'll also lower the opacity of the blend effects that we're adding too. So it's better to lower at this point, always to lower the fill if you want to lighten it a little bit, that you don't want the text to be so heavy. So next, let's go in and add some embossing adjustments in order to integrate the text a little bit better. And we do that by going to the effects panel here, and we're going to add in bevel and emboss. Okay, so you have different choices. You've got an outer bevel, an inner bevel. You've also got embossing, pillow embossing, and a stroke emboss, which isn't really ideal for this. So we could try, for example, an emboss for this, and we could just zoom into 100%. So I'm just going to hold down the control key and just click a few times, and we'll zoom in. At the moment, it doesn't look so good, because first thing we have to do is check the direction of the light. You can see the light is coming from this direction, so we have to correct that in our so that looks about right for the direction of the light. You can also change these settings. Normally these are on 50% by default, so I've lowered this down to about 30%, and this to about 55 is good. Just one thing I skipped over there was the technique as well. So you can choose a different type of technique, a chisel hard or a chisel soft or smooth. Smooth does not really make this one look good. Chisel hard is a little bit too much, I think, for this one. So I think we'll choose chisel soft, and that kind of captures the edges of the wood here nicely as it moves into the surface, so it looks nice. You can also soften that a little bit. So if you're finding that you think it looks too hard, you can just soften it slightly. And we can also reduce the size of it as well. So perhaps that looks a little bit better. You can also change the altitude of your light. So if the light is, you think is at a little higher or lower. So we're going to choose about, I think about, let's see, 30 degrees seems okay for this. Yeah, that looks okay. You can also check these contours. So if you want to add a little bit of a different contour, so a different edge to it, you can use this contour adjustment. So I think I'll leave without it. And you can also add texture. So I don't have a wood texture. If you wanted to, you could add a further wood texture over this here. So you can see if I add a texture, it gets added into the background. The current texture is this pattern here. And you can have different types of textures. If you had a wood texture, you could add that also. You can add color overlays if you wish to, which we're not going to add here, or pattern overlays as well, which we're also not going to add in this one. So the final thing that we need to do is because there's one slight issue that you may note here is that the fall off of the edge of the light on the edge here, you can see it's coming over into these gaps. So that makes it not look so realistic. So that's a little bit of a problem. So in order to get rid of that, what we need to do is we need to go to our blending options here. So how the layer is blending with it, and we need to so choose these blend, so blend if. So blend if gray, for instance. So we need to take this dark slider here, and we need to change the underlying layer. We need to move this to the right in order to make it blend better. So we can either move it like this, which works I think quite nice. We can move the whole slider, and you can see here where it's black, then now we no longer see those light edges. So it's blending all nicely all the way across the text. That's blending in nicely. And once I'm happy with that, I can click on OK. There we see it before and then after. And you can also turn the effects off before and after too. And our smart filter as well, which is in this case the displacement map. You can also turn that on and off. And the great thing about this, the way we've edited this is that with the smart filters, we can go back in and edit the text anytime we want. So if we want to add new text or change the text, I can come back in here, choose the text tool. I can come in and edit this and change this to fruit, for instance, even though technically there is no fruit in this display, it's just vegetables. And we save that, and now we have a new text added with all the adjustments, so it's quite flexible as well. Okay, thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope it was helpful.